All right, let's dive in. Today we're exploring a fascinating idea, how something considered good can take a dark turn.
Sounds intriguing.
We're looking at, this excerpt from That Which Was Good Becomes the Greatest of Evils.
Yeah.
And what's really captivating is that it uses the fall of the Russian Empire to kind of raise questions about modern-day Canada.
It's fascinating, really, because the author kind of connects these seemingly positive developments with this, underlying sense of unease.
Hmm.
They point out that pre-revolution Russia, is experiencing, significant progress,
Yeah.
growing literacy rates, booming industrialization, a population on the rise, all signs that things were moving in the right direction.
Yeah, you'd think so, but they suggest there was this hidden undercurrent, this moral rot kind of lurking beneath this facade of progress.
Right.
It makes you wonder, right? Were those advancements actually masking deeper issues or even contributing to them?
It's a great question, and to kind of illustrate this point, the author turns to literature,
Okay.
specifically the works of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy.
Mm-hmm.
Think of novels like Crime and Punishment and Anna Karenina.
Yeah, yeah.
These weren't just fictional stories, they were reflections of the anxieties, the moral struggles, the spiritual searching of that whole era.
It's like those authors were picking up on this sense of unease that wasn't necessarily reflected in the official narrative of progress.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just writers.
Wow.
The author points out that even the Orthodox Church was losing its grip on the people's trust.
Yeah.
Having been tied to state power since Peter the Great.
Yeah, this loss of faith in these traditional institutions is a key point. It created this spiritual vacuum, a sense that the old ways were failing, which may have made people more susceptible to radical new ideologies.
So in steps Tsar Nicholas II. He was actually trying to resist this tide of westernization and modernization sweeping through Russia. He envisioned a Russia rooted in its own traditions, and values, more attuned to the needs of its people.
But could it be that his intentions, while, perhaps noble, were ultimately misguided? History kind of paints Nicholas II as this weak, indecisive ruler who failed to grasp the magnitude of the challenges facing his empire.
Yeah, some might even say he was naive to think he could hold back the forces of change that were already in motion.
Right.
He was trying to preserve these old ways while the world around him was rapidly transforming.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of the most controversial claims in the source. The idea that the Tsar's assassination unleashed this demonic force upon Russia.
Wow.
I know that might sound dramatic, but the author truly believes this act had real-world consequences that extended far beyond the immediate political upheaval.
It's a chilling thought. Regardless of whether we interpret that claim literally or figuratively, it raises questions, right?
Yeah.
About the ripple effects of violence and the unintended consequences of political actions. Makes you think about how one event, even the death of a single individual, can, shift the course of history.
And speaking of the consequences of violence, the author, they point us to a different podcast called The Anti-Humans, if we want to delve deeper into the horrors of early Soviet rule.
Okay.
They even caution listeners about the potential emotional impact of that content, which I think speaks to the gravity of what happened.
Yeah, they don't shy away from acknowledging the darkness of that period.
No.
But what they do emphasize is that the suffering wasn't limited to any specific group.
Right.
They give examples of individuals from various backgrounds, Poles, Croats, even Jews, who were just swept up in this tide of violence and committed horrific acts.
It's a stark reminder that ideology can corrupt anyone, regardless of their background or beliefs.
Right.
And this leads to a point that's often overlooked,
Uh-huh.
the suffering of ethnic Russians during this period.
Yeah, we often hear about the Holodomor in Ukraine.
Right.
But the famine extended into Russia as well,
It did.
causing immense devastation.
And then there's that chilling quote from Lenin about Russians being too kind for revolutionary terror.
Oh, wow.
The author argues that this belief led to the initial Soviet elite containing very few ethnic Russians. Instead, they relied on individuals who were deemed more ideologically committed
Yeah.
and ruthless in carrying out the revolution's goals.
So it almost sounds like in their pursuit of creating this new Soviet society, they were willing to sacrifice anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of what a true revolutionary should be,
Yeah.
even their own people.
It's a disturbing thought. The author suggests that Russians had to be destroyed and reconstituted as Soviets to be considered useful to the regime.
Mm.
It speaks to the totalizing nature of early communist ideology, how it sought to reshape not just the political and economic systems, but the very identities of individuals.
It's almost as if they believed they were engineering a new type of human being,
Yeah.
completely stripped of their previous allegiances and molded into the perfect communist citizen.
And this brings us to a crucial concept the author calls the ontological shift of early communists.
Okay.
They argue this ideology wasn't just about demanding our loyalty, it demanded a complete reshaping of one's soul, a fundamental shift in how individuals perceive themselves and their place in the world.
So it's like they took this scientific materialist worldview and twisted it into this like quasi-religious dogma. If you weren't fully dedicated to the cause, if you questioned the party line or like clung to old beliefs, you were seen as not just an enemy of the state, but an enemy of the universe itself.
Yeah.
You were carrying, defective genes that needed to be eradicated.
It's a chilling example of how ideology, when taken to extremes, can dehumanize entire groups of people and justify these unspeakable acts of cruelty. And what's truly fascinating is how this seemingly utopian vision, based on equality and liberation, could devolve into something so monstrous.
It's a paradox, isn't it? How could a movement that claimed to be about human progress lead to such widespread suffering?
That's a question that historians and philosophers have grappled with for decades.
Yep.
To understand this transformation, we need to consider the historical and philosophical currents that shaped early Soviet thought.
Okay. So where do we go from here? This whole concept of good becoming corrupted is pretty heavy stuff.
Well, next time we'll explore how the author sees the fall of the USSR and what unsettling connections they make to contemporary issues in Canada.
Buckle up.
Buckle up, because this deep dive is about to get even more thought-provoking.
All right. Last time we were exploring how good intentions, societal progress, even religious institutions can be kind of twisted into something truly terrifying.
Yeah.
But the author doesn't stop there.
Mm.
They go on to draw these like unsettling parallels between the fall of the Soviet Union and contemporary issues in Canada.
And it's a bold move to compare, a superpower like the USSR to a country often seen as, this beacon of peace and stability.
Right.
It challenges our assumptions about Canada's place in the world and forces us to consider whether we might be more vulnerable than we think.
Right. And what's striking is that the author seems to suggest that some of the seeds of the USSR's downfall might actually be present in Canada today. They start by discussing how, that early Soviet ideology with its intense focus on purity and revolution, ultimately proved unsustainable.
Yeah.
It demanded too much, created too many enemies, and just couldn't deliver on its promises.
It's an important point that, early fervent form of communism, it was built on this almost impossible ideal.
Yeah.
It demanded complete devotion to the cause and saw anyone who deviated even slightly as an enemy.
Right.
In a way, it set itself up for failure from the start.
So they had to shift gears, right?
Yeah.
Leaders like Brezhnev and Gorbachev, they brought in a more pragmatic approach, what they call realpolitik. It's basically this idea that you have to deal with the world as it is, not as you wish it to be.
Right.
You have to make compromises, negotiate, and sometimes, even put aside your ideals for the sake of survival.
Exactly. And the author argues that, this later Soviet Union, while still officially communist, became much more focused on maintaining its power on the global stage than on adhering to this, strict ideological purity.
Right.
It's almost as if they traded their revolutionary zeal for political pragmatism, which ultimately made them less feared, but also perhaps less united and less driven by that shared purpose.
And this is where the author's anxieties about Canada come into play.
Yeah.
They see a similar kind of complacency, this lack of fighting spirit, the will to assert oneself on the world stage. They suggest that Canada's leaders today are more focused on managing internal affairs, maintaining a comfortable status quo,
Right.
than on boldly pursuing the nation's interests on a global scale.
It's an interesting perspective. The author specifically points to, several issues that they believe are symptomatic of this decline. One is the state of Canada's healthcare system, which is often criticized for being overburdened and inefficient.
Right. They also bring up MAID,
Yeah.
medical assistance in dying,
Yeah.
and it's increasing accessibility, which they seem to view as a sign of a society losing its will to live.
Yeah.
You know, a society that's becoming too focused on individual comfort and perhaps losing sight of the inherent value of life itself.
And then there's the issue of immigration.
Right.
The author expresses concern about Canada's reliance on immigration from what they call the third world to boost its population.
Right.
They suggest that this focus on bringing in people from other cultures might be diluting Canada's national identity and could lead to social fragmentation.
It's certainly a contentious issue, and it's, you know, worth noting that the author's views on immigration, they're likely shared by a segment of the population, but, you know, they're not universally held.
Right.
It's a complex topic with no easy answers.
Absolutely. And the author's concerns go beyond policy debates.
Yeah.
You know, they also point to more disturbing issues.
Okay.
Like the presence of assassins and drug cartels operating within Canada. It's a reminder that even peaceful, prosperous nations are not immune to these darker forces at play in the world.
They even cite Frank Vaughan, who claims that Canada's ruling class is deeply intertwined with organized crime. I know that might sound like something out of conspiracy theory, but Vaughan actually provides specific examples, like Canada's role in the distribution of fentanyl.
Right.
You know, a highly addictive and dangerous opioid.
Whether or not, you know, you agree with Vaughan's assessment, it highlights the author's concern about the potential for corruption and criminal influence at the highest levels of Canadian society.
It's like they're saying that Canada's like outward image of peace and order, you know, might be masking a darker reality.
Yeah.
That beneath the surface, there are these forces at work that could threaten the very foundations of the nation.
And perhaps the most unsettling parallel the author draws is this idea that Canada, like pre-revolution Russia, has the potential for greatness, but is being deliberately weakened by its own leadership.
They suggest that Canada could be a continental power on par with, you know, the United States, Russia, and China.
Yeah.
If only its leaders had the vision and the will to pursue that goal. But, you know, instead they see a leadership that's more concerned with political correctness and appeasement than with asserting Canada's interests, you know, and protecting its citizens.
It's a strong indictment of the current state of Canadian politics.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to this question of leadership that we discussed earlier. The author seems to be yearning for a leader with the kind of resolve that Tsar Nicholas II lacked.
Right.
Someone who understands the gravity of the threats facing Canada and is willing to take decisive action to protect the nation's interests, even if it means making difficult choices.
So it's like they're calling for a leader who's willing to put Canada first, you know, even if it means ruffling some feathers on the international stage or challenging the prevailing orthodoxy within Canada itself.
And to illustrate this point, the author introduces this fascinating concept of concentric rings of loyalty.
Okay.
They argue that our loyalties are layered, starting with the most personal and expanding outward to encompass larger groups.
So it starts with loyalty to God,
Right.
then to family,
Yes.
then to community, then to nation, then to one's racial or ethnic group,
Right.
and finally to humanity as a whole.
It's like a set of nested circles, with each level of loyalty building upon the one before it.
It's a thought-provoking framework for understanding how individuals prioritize their allegiances and make decisions in these, you know, complex situations.
Right.
And it highlights the author's belief that a healthy society requires this strong sense of national loyalty,
Right.
a shared commitment to the well-being of one's own people.
Yes. And the author seems to be suggesting that this sense of national loyalty might be waning in Canada, perhaps overshadowed by other loyalties.
Yeah.
Like those to specific interest groups.
Right.
To global causes, or even to a more abstract notion of humanity that, you know, transcends national boundaries.
It's a complex issue and one that's certainly open to debate. But the author's point is that, you know, if a leader does not prioritize the well-being of their own people, their own nation, you know, then what are they truly seeking to accomplish?
It's a powerful question and one that gets to the heart of what it means to be a leader?
Yeah.
Are they serving the interests of their constituents?
Yeah.
Or are they pursuing a broader agenda that might not align with the needs and aspirations of those they're supposed to represent?
That's a great question.
And with that thought-provoking question, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered so far. We'll return shortly to wrap up this deep dive and consider some final, crucial thoughts.
Wow, that was a lot to unpack. Like, it's amazing how the author connected the dots between, the fall of the Soviet Union and their anxieties about modern-day Canada.
It's a provocative analysis for sure. And what struck me is that they don't really offer any simple solutions, right? They kind of just leave us with a series of these unsettling questions, that challenge our assumptions about progress, about leadership, even the nature of good itself.
It's almost like they're saying, look, I've shown you how things can go wrong. Even in seemingly prosperous and stable societies.
Right.
Now it's up to you to figure out how to avoid making the same mistake.
Exactly. It's a call to action, not in a sense of like panic or despair, but in a spirit of informed engagement, right?
Right.
They're urging us to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives, we're being told.
Yeah.
To think critically about the direction we want our society to take.
So where does that leave us? Like, what are we supposed to do with all this information?
Well, I think the first step is to recognize that even the concept of good can be complex. It's multifaceted. What might seem like progress to one person could be seen as, a decline by another. It all depends on your perspective, your values, and your priorities.
It's like that old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Right.
You know what one person sees as a positive development, another might see as a step in the wrong direction.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think the author is challenging us to examine our own assumptions about what constitutes a good society.
Yeah.
Are we prioritizing individual freedom over collective well-being? Are we sacrificing long-term stability for short-term gains? Are we losing sight of our shared values in the pursuit of, material prosperity?
It's a lot to think about. It makes you wonder, what are the warning signs? Like, how can we tell if our society is heading down a dangerous path?
Yeah. Well, the also provides some clues, right? They point to the erosion of these traditional institutions.
Yeah.
The loss of faith in authority and the rise of ideologies that prioritize individual desires over collective responsibility.
Right.
They also express concern about the growing influence of special interest groups and the increasing polarization of our political discourse.
It's like we're becoming more fragmented as a society.
Right.
More focus on our differences than on what unites us. And that kind of makes us more vulnerable to manipulation by those who seek to exploit those divisions for their own gain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the author's analysis of the Soviet Union, it provides this chilling example of how quickly things can unravel when a society loses its sense of shared purpose and its commitment to the common good.
So what's the antidote? How do we kind of guard against these negative trends and ensure that our society remains, strong and resilient?
Well, I don't think there's any easy answer or one-size-fits-all solution, but
Yeah.
I think the author is suggesting that we need to rediscover a sense of shared purpose. A commitment to something larger than ourselves, whether that's a shared national identity, a set of core values,
Right.
or a belief in a higher power. We need something that binds us together, that motivates us to work towards a common goal.
It's like we need a North Star, to guide us, this sense of direction that transcends our individual differences and reminds us that we're all in this together.
And perhaps just as importantly, we need to cultivate a healthy skepticism towards those who claim to have all the answers.
Right.
Whether it's, politicians or pundits or even, well-intentioned activists, we need to be willing to question their motives, question their assumptions and their proposed solutions.
We need to think for ourselves and engage in respectful dialogue,
Right.
with those who hold different views. It's about finding that balance between being open to new ideas while also being discerning, and critical.
Exactly. It's about being informed, engaged citizens who are willing to participate in the shaping of our society. And it's about recognizing that the future is not, predetermined.
Right.
It's something we create through our choices and our actions.
It's empowering in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, we're not just these passive observers, we have the power to shape the course of events.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
The source material focused on how good can be corrupted or destroyed,
No,
right?
right.
But could it be that a nation's goodness itself, its very virtues, can become a source of vulnerability?
It's an interesting question. Could it be that qualities like compassion, tolerance, a willingness to help others, while admirable in themselves, could make a society susceptible to exploitation or manipulation, by those seeking to undermine its core values?
Yeah.
Is there a necessary balance between idealism and pragmatism, between openness and self-preservation to safeguard against such a fall?
Those are questions worth pondering. And perhaps there are no easy answers, but I think the author is urging us to engage in this kind of critical reflection.
Yeah.
To be mindful of the potential pitfalls of even the most well-intentioned policies and ideologies, and to always strive for that delicate balance between our ideals and the realities of the world we live in.
It's a lot to take in, but I think that's the beauty of a deep dive like this, right? It challenges us to think differently, to question our assumptions, to engage in these meaningful conversations about the issues that matter most.
Exactly.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep, my friends. Until next time.